and welcome to this episode of Encountering Jesus. My name is Cindy Johnston and I'm your host. You are listening to my book, Stairway to Heaven's Door. This book is copyrighted 2023 and all rights are reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced without permission. I hope you enjoy this podcast. Now here's the book.
Chapter 8: His Special Training. There I was, a bit horrified, as I watched the poor little rabbit trying to get free. I don't blame it for being so unhappy. It had just been taken from its friend and the safety of its home only to be put into the arms of a little boy who was holding it too tightly. Clearly the rabbit was terrified as it kept fighting to get away. It was obvious to me that Nate had no idea how to control the little rabbit. Because he was so young and inexperienced, I was worried he might actually hurt the little creature by squeezing it too tightly. Watching all this happening was making me very upset. I knelt down and tried to help, but the bunny was way too wiggly and terrified to manage. I looked up to find Jesus watching me from across the room and I was so surprised. He looked casual as he stood there leaning against the counter drinking something hot from a mug. But then our eyes met and I saw his deep love for me. I had been running from that love and those eyes for days. Suddenly, my thoughts were interrupted as the rabbit broke free and began hopping away. Several men jumped up to retrieve it and put it back in Nate's lap. Nate grabbed it even tighter this time and I was freaking out. I desperately looked back up at Jesus and mouthed, "Help me please." He pursed his lips and gave me a nod. His eyes were twinkling and this again left me puzzled. Soon, he made his way to the back of the room as he came towards us. Even though I was upset with him, I was so relieved that help was on its way. He never took his eyes off me and the whole time they sparkled with mirth. Something about this made me happy instead of angry. Also, I was very intrigued as I kept wondering what he was thinking. When Jesus got to us, he dropped down onto the floor with us. Then to my surprise he laid down, stretching himself out as he propped his upper body up on one elbow. He finished off his hot drink and put the cup behind him. "Cindy, why don't you help me make a place for the bunny by laying down?" I was a bit puzzled at the idea. I couldn't even imagine what he had in mind. "It's okay, little one, I've got this," he reassured as he extended his hand to me. I took his hand and he drew me down beside him. When I looked into his eyes, I saw again the mirth lurking there along with that cute hint of a smile beneath his beard. It was clear that Jesus was enjoying himself and for some reason I felt like it was at my expense. Once I was stretched out alongside of Jesus, some of the others took the bunny from Nate so he could do the same. When it was all done, the three of us made a small triangular pen. Jesus instructed those helping to go and get the other rabbit and they put both bunnies in the middle of our little human enclosure. Everyone in the room was quiet now as they were curious as to what Jesus was doing. Some of them were helping to form an outer barricade so the bunnies wouldn't hop over our legs or the holes in our little human fence. Right away I noticed the two rabbits snuggling close to each other and it wasn't long before the first one calmed down. Then I smiled at how quickly that first rabbit got brave enough to start hopping around. "Son," Jesus addressed Nate, "the first thing you need to understand about any living creature is you cannot force it to do what you want. This violates their basic need to feel safe. As you see here, we have made a human pen for the rabbits to keep them safe, but we are not holding them tightly or forcing them into anything. This type of setting will allow you to develop a connection with the rabbits. Later we will make you a little fenced-in area so that you can take the rabbits out and do this safely. As you spend more time with these little creatures, they will come to trust and love you. This may take a while, so you will need to be very patient as you let them move at their own pace." About then the first rabbit hopped right up to Jesus. Jesus' voice became so tender and soft as he looked right at the bunny, but he continued to talk to Nate. Now the rabbit has come over to see if it can get away. I won't force it to do anything, but I will gently reach out to pet it and talk ever so softly. Jesus reached out very slowly towards the rabbit until he touched the side of its head. The rabbit froze, but it didn't hop away. I found myself so surprised watching Jesus in action. I marveled at this gentle person whose unassuming nature even had the skittish bunny responding to his love. Gently Jesus reached up to pet the rabbit's head, but it backed up a step, and then sniffed Jesus' fingers. Jesus kept speaking softly and tenderly. His eyes never left the rabbit, and I was sure that the little bunny thought he was speaking to it. But Jesus was still teaching Nate as he talked. Over time the animal's trust in you will grow. Once this happens, you will notice that it will start to enjoy being with you as long as it feels free to do things on its own terms. Do you understand what that means, Nate? Nate shook his head. It means that you do everything in a way that the rabbit is comfortable. You don't push it or force it to do anything that will scare it. Now the rabbit was allowing Jesus to softly rub its head. Quietly Jesus asked one of the men to bring him some lettuce. When the guy handed Jesus the lettuce, it frightened the bunny, and so it hopped back into the middle. Jesus then placed the food in little bites close to them, and they reached out and ate some. Then he made a trail of lettuce bites leading to himself, and little by little both rabbits grew closer and closer to Jesus until they allowed him to feed them by hand. The place was so quiet you could hear yourself breathe. Then Jesus began teaching again very quietly so as not to scare the rabbits. Your goal is to take such good care of them and treat them with absolute love and respect so that they never have any reason to fear you. You must become their safe place. When Jesus looked at me again, I began to figure out that Nate wasn't the only one getting an object lesson. This got me to thinking about how Jesus had been dealing with me. He never pushed, demanded, or forced me into anything. Suddenly, I began to see that my brokenness and the enemy's lies had caused me to greatly misjudge Jesus in what was going on in my life on earth. He really was the Good Shepherd, and all our heavenly interactions always reflected his sweetness and divine patience with me. At Jesus' direction, the lettuce was passed to Nate. One of the rabbits followed the food, while the other was still looking for food in Jesus' hand. Gradually over time, when these timid little ones see you take good care of them, all fear of you will eventually leave them. Once this happens, they will no longer have to have everything on their terms. This is when you can gradually start picking them up. Over time, these little bunnies will grow to trust you with their life. Jesus looked at me again, and this time his eyes were so loving and sweet, and I knew his intentions towards me were always for my good. Something began to shift in my heart, and my anger and disappointment towards him began to fade. About this time, the second rabbit hopped over to Nate and began sniffing at the lettuce in his hand. Then the fearful one joined in. Nate waited, and Jesus gave him a nod. Slowly Nate reached out and touched the little bunny on the side of its head. The other rabbits scooted in so that Nate was able to pet them both. I was so surprised how quickly both of the sweet rabbits were eating out of Nate's hands. I turned to look at Jesus and found him smiling at me. As I looked into those guileless eyes, I knew there was no ulterior motives or manipulation to get me to do what he wanted. Like the bunnies, he was just loving and taking care of me as he waited for me to figure out that I can trust him enough to receive his love. As my heart opened up to him, I connected with him on a deeper level, and I could feel his thoughts and feelings. Unexpectedly, I knew his pain. I understood that I had hurt him in my distrust and accusations. It seems he is always being falsely accused. Tears stung my eyes as I reached out and took his hand. Am I your little bunny? I tried to be funny, but the tears in my eyes along with my little sniff gave me away. I hadn't meant to test Jesus' love, but I had nonetheless. Yes, he chuckled. His voice sounded light-hearted, but the depth of love in his eyes brought more tears. Very gently he reached over and caressed my cheek, and it reminded me of how he had petted the bunny. I was tempted to feel shame for my behavior, but then I could see in his eyes there was no judgment. Instead, I could tell how pleased he was with my change of heart. His words spoken directly into my spirit reinforced what I was feeling. Sweet one, even though you had a time where you became fearful and heard it was short-lived. I'm so pleased you are here now and allowing me to love on you again. I can see in your eyes that you are back to trusting me to take care of you. He playfully tapped my nose before he sat up. He took both my hands and helped me sit up with him. I was so relieved that Jesus was as sweet and wonderful as I originally thought he was. The cute little rabbits were put back into their home, and I was so amazed at how Jesus used this unusual situation to teach me his true motives and love for me. Each time I go back and read this story again, I'm overwhelmed by Jesus' great love. As I pondered the events in my life in light of the new revelations I discovered in this parable, I could now see that Jesus had never forced me to do anything. Even in this particular situation, he did not force me to spend time with him. Instead, he waited until I asked him to help me stay put long enough to connect with him. How remarkable his patience and consistency in always waiting until I ask for help. My heart still melts at his humble and thoughtful presentation. When Jesus does these things for me, it convinces me over and over that he truly is the most tender, gentle person I have ever known. For us to fully let our guard down and allow Jesus to have full access to our hearts and lives, we must see him as entirely good. We need to understand that whether we know it or not, Jesus is taking care of us. He is training us like he did with the bunnies, and he is doing it in a way that is on our terms. Though he longs to hold us and love us completely, he waits patiently until we can trust him enough to give him our whole heart. He is our loving shepherd, and he knows how to tend us in a way that really is best. But in his gentle ways he is never forceful or demanding. In Isaiah 40 verse 11 it says, "He tends his flock like a shepherd. He gathers the lambs in his arms and carries them close to his heart. He gently leads those that have young." There is also David's famous Psalms 23 and of course Jesus' own description of himself as the Good Shepherd in John 10. But in both of the scripture passages it talks of an enemy. Like with what happened with me, I mistakenly thought that Jesus wasn't good. This happened because of the wrong things I had been taught about God. Then over the years the sneaky enemy continued building on these lies so I could not see Jesus rightly. Over and over Jesus has made it clear that he is good. But I have had to prove that out for myself. Because of the evil tares planted in my heart at such a young age, I've had to pull them one by one as I've discovered that everything Jesus does in my life is for my best. This hasn't been easy, but each time I rediscover who Jesus is, I find that he really is more loving and good than I even understood before. After 8+ years of Jesus revealing himself like this, I am becoming deeply convinced that he is absolute love. Now I knew this in theory before these encounters, but now I know it from experience. There are no hidden agendas with Jesus. When I have eyes to see, I have found that Jesus always cares for me with such tenderness and compassion. He knows how to soothe all my fears, and he gives me rest when I have worn myself out with worry and striving. I have found that if at any point I become resistant to his goodness, then out of love he will pursue me with actions and words so gentle and tender they draw me back into the fold. But it's never controlling or manipulative. Instead, he always deals with me in a way that I can clearly see just how careful he is being with me. This always reassures me that he knows just what I need. As part of the freedom God has given us, we are allowed to make mistakes. There is always forgiveness and love when we see what we have done. I never expected that I could feel such freedom to make mistakes and be myself with Jesus. In fact, he actually encourages me to take risks. Over these last few years, I'm finding now that I'm much quicker and more confident to yield my heart to him. Never in my life have I ever thought it was possible for me to trust anyone like I trust Jesus. It is so amazing that he has trained me, just like he showed Nate to do with the bunnies, and now I'm seeing that this trust he's building in me is lasting and strong.
Thank you for listening to my podcast. This book, Stairway to Heaven's Door, is a companion book to my other book, Heaven's Door. And both of these books are used in an e-course to help you learn how to encounter Jesus. You can find more out about all the books that I've published and the e-course on my website, heavensdoor41.com. Bye now.